Righto, afternoon all. Thank you for joining me on our roundtable event discussing diversity and inclusion on tech with a particular focus on hiring and building out diverse teams. Obviously, I'm Sam Smith from Amicus, one of the senior consultants here, having been with the business for a little over 3 years now. Obviously, I'm really excited to welcome every member of our panel today, so I'll go around and let everyone introduce themselves. So starting with Fiona.
Hi, I'm Fiona Wright. I'm People and Culture Manager at Oddbox, and we're a vegetable subscription company of about 60 people.
Fantastic. Toby?
Hi there, I'm Toby Levy. I head up the talent acquisition or the recruitment for Hertility Health. We're a startup who help women understand their hormone and fertility effectively, so looking at their reproductive and hormonal health.
Fantastic. And Lauren Harris?
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm a senior manager for talent attraction for data and analytics at Omnicom Media Group. So we are a massive media conglomerate with multiple different agencies under our umbrella, and we're about 1,800 people in the UK.
Brilliant. And last but not least, Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren Benson-Armer. I am a member of Apolitical, which is a social learning platform for government. I'm the people lead on a team of 55.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for you all joining me today. I suppose we'll kick it straight off with, I suppose, the first and most important question to this is, what does diversity mean to everyone on the panel?
I think it's a really powerful way to get different thought processes and make sure that companies can grow. If everyone's got the same viewpoints, companies really stagnate, and you get a real echo chamber, and there's a lot of kind of that confirmation bias where people just want to have the same views so that they fit in. And the more you build on diversity, the more you open that up and the more you can bring in new viewpoints, which your customers appreciate just as much as your colleagues are going to appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's to kind of continue the point. The same people, the same thought processes, the same skill sets encourages just one way of continuing. Whereas I think, yeah, the minute you start going diverse, you start opening up to different ways of thinking, different brain types, etc. You start to see all of a sudden that the picture gets a lot bigger and a lot wider, because you might all have the same vision, the same goal, the same aim, but ultimately there's different ways of getting there. There's different things to do along the way, and that can only be a good thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's plenty of ways to look at it, isn't there? And I think I really like the point of it. It's a different way of thinking within the team. It's not just obviously box checking, is it at all? It's there's so many different ways for growth to be affected by it. I suppose for both Laurens, when we're looking at it from a tech perspective, how can we, I suppose, look at it from that side? How do we really address diversity from, I suppose, its core perspective in tech?
So I think that I suppose the biggest issue with diversity that we've seen in tech is diversity across the gender split. So we've seen that a lot of the candidates that apply to our roles are male. So we've been really working on a mission to attract female applicants, whether that's by changing some of the languages that we use in our job titles. We're also making a massive push for socioeconomic diversity as well, which is another area that I think can be a bit challenging in the tech space. And in order to do that, we've been working with like grassroots organizations that help people with no educational degree but put them through a training program.
I think in terms of outcomes as well, if you've got a diverse pipeline and you're getting diverse people onto your team, it's also about inclusivity, belonging. So if you feel like you belong on a team, you're not the only person of your gender, of your racial group, then you feel more like you can contribute. And that is good for motivation. It's good for engagement, productivity, and that's good for business outcomes. So win-win.
Yeah, exactly. I think, we've just touched on it. Lauren, you touched on it just then in terms of just one aspect of diversity, which obviously is gender diversity, but also socioeconomic diversity. So, I mean, from there, how can we set about, especially as talent professionals, identifying, I suppose, maybe struggles, or how do we, go about identifying what might be a problem within the industry, or what might be problems within each individual companies?
We have probably a problem that's different to most, and that we're, as you may expect from what we do, the vast majority of our workforce is female, which is a problem that say a problem is something not most businesses have, right? So recruiting men actually is that's how we're trying to bring more diversity to the team. That said, when it comes to the tech team specifically, that's where the male people seem to be joining the team, and already that's become a bit of a male centric team. So yeah, trying to, I guess for me, it's how do you make it accessible is the first step to all other applicants. And I know there's women in tech and women in data and all these sorts of groups that from a visibility point of view can really help. But I guess that's just the first part, right? It's then about continuing down the journey, making every applicant feel that they belong, because there's things I guess we all do that we don't necessarily mean to do it. It might be language, like you just mentioned, Lauren, or something else, that it has to be right on the money for everybody to feel that this is where they belong.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, sorry.
Also tying it to culture, I think understanding what your culture is, what you're trying to create in terms of employee experience, and then mapping out what that looks like for each employee and how you can take small steps in each of those areas to make a difference for DEI.
We actually have a really interesting part of our business, which we call marketing sciences. So it still sits within our tech discipline, but it's basically our analytics team. And half of it is like coding, building models, very, very hands-on technical role. And then the other half is, we call it behavioral sciences. So it's all about research and insights and understanding human behavior. What we found is that the coding roles or the coding teams are very, very heavily male, and the insights and behavioral sciences team are very heavily female. So what we're trying to decipher is that because, there are sort of stereotypical female personality traits or characteristics that are generally more interested in that sort of work versus a sort of hands-on technical role, or is it because there's not enough representation in each team? It's kind of like a chicken and egg scenario that we're trying to crack, and maybe sort of cross-skilling is the answer, or just finding out sort of where people's interests lie and why. So we're doing a bit of research behind that at the moment. I was wondering if anyone else had a similar situation and across their tech teams.
Ours is more similar to Toby's, as women are a higher population within the rest of the business, but more specifically within the coding part of engineering, not so heavily. We put a lot of focus on recruiting an engineering manager and made sure that we were giving a lot of precedence to female candidates to make sure that we were giving them that fair shot there, because having that representation at a management leadership level within the tech team is a real culture changer. It makes sure that bro culture has no place to sneak in, and we're a company where everyone believes we're very open and inclusive, but these things do sneak in, and if you don't actively work on them as well, they're going to keep sneaking in. And our analytics team here is all female now, which is obviously a good balance, but the core engineering team and the core coding team is predominantly male. So it's making sure you've got that culture check to make sure that you can't sneak that bro code underneath the radar.
I think that touched on a really good point there in terms of obviously the engineering manager that you've brought in a lot of work to make sure that so diversity is seen within that. So I suppose it puts me onto a question of where does it start? Because obviously ourselves as talent and people teams, it's a big thing for ourselves, but where can we implement, and where does it start from a diversity perspective throughout the whole chain of not just tech, but the wider company as well?
I think diversity. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I think diversity starts with inclusion, especially when we're talking about women and underrepresented groups. A lot of people, the more they can see that inclusion is real, the more they are likely to join that company. So you can say we have diversity goals, but unless you've got inclusion goals backing those up, you're never going to reach your diversity goals. You have to be able to show that you include people through inclusive language, through inclusive policies, through flexibility for whatever is important for those groups. Whether you're talking about people from a minority ethnicity, whether you're talking about women, whether you're talking about people who are neurodivergent, you have to show them that they will be included and listened to within the business.
Yeah, I completely echo that. I completely agree. I think there's obviously so many different elements to diversity. We've spoken a lot already about gender, but it goes way beyond that, right? And there's, whether it's socioeconomic groups or rate or ethnicities, whatever it may be, there are different elements of diversity. So when somebody says, "Is your team diverse?" it's a question that, you know, no one. You started the question off, Sam. I think when we started with kind of, what does it mean to you? Well, I guess the answer is it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and no one can crack this diversity. However, there are so many steps you can take in so many different fields when it comes to diversity, and I agree with Fiona, and inclusion. I think that is a massive part that you know, I wouldn't say it gets left out, but everyone says the D word and not necessarily the I word, and I think they back each other up really well.
And when we're talking about, obviously, I think Fiona, you touched on the bro code in terms of like the very non-diverse teams and making sure that everyone is represented. You talk about obviously bringing someone in at a managerial level. How do we ensure that sort of that is then kept at that level and we see progression rather than just one person in and from there? How does that, I suppose, level out throughout the company and as businesses grow and scale as well?
So something we do in once we've kind of figured out the diversity pipeline part is in the recruitment process, make sure that it's exclusively skills based. So we try to, you know, we anonymize in the first round so that we don't see people's names. We don't have any idea of who they are. We just look at the skills that they're showing and you know, the competencies that we look for. And then from there you get a diverse group of people, hopefully, if you've taken the steps like language and putting it on specific job boards to say, okay, we've got a diverse group of people. Now let's test for the skills that they need to succeed at our organization. And for us, that starts with not only looking at what you need to be successful in a role, but also at the company in general. So the behaviors tied to our leadership principles, because we want to set people up for success. So if you've got the diversity part of the pipeline, you're working on inclusion in the organization. It's also just about getting the right person into that space to be able to progress. And if you're not setting people up for success, then, you know, is there any point to the other stuff?
How do you do that, Lauren? From a sense of, I mean, with a recruitment hat on, and Sam might either nod his head or shake his head, I'm not sure. But having been in recruitment myself, ultimately, you know, of course, the language side of setting up that pipeline, accessibility, completely agree with. But ultimately, when you get then a plethora of applications, somebody, a recruiter, I guess, has to find a way of sifting through somewhere a number, right? Whether it's, you might have 500 applications that are cut down to 10, for example. How do you make sure that's all as skill, you know, there's no, I guess, no gut involved, that it's all skills based? Or how do you guys go about that? Because that's a challenge, I think, sometimes by volume. You simply have to find ways of cutting the pool down. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not being diverse. However, it might mean that you're missing things, or you're not being as diverse as you may want to be.
Yeah. So we use rubrics to start off with each of the roles that we're hiring for. So we have a job description, that's, you know, roles and responsibilities, day-to-day work. We have a progression framework for each of the roles. So what skills you need, what level of competency you need at each of those levels, and then also the behaviors that I mentioned, which is, you know, the same. So from there, you have an idea of what the person needs to succeed in the role. The rubric is must-haves and nice-to-haves, and then we weight those. So you have to have 3 or all of the must-haves and 3 nice-to-haves, and that helps us whittle down the list of sometimes massive numbers of applicants. So then you really know that it is about the skills that people have. It's not about, you know, where they used to work, anything like that. And then also our first culture round is not only minimum skills, but also, minimum viability for behaviors that we need at the company. And it's a two-way conversation. So it's me saying, I want to talk to you about the ways of working at our company, which is quite differentiated and unique in its culture. And I want to see if maybe you're right for it. You would be a culture add, and also for you to decide if that's right for you. And sometimes we do have people pulling out saying, this isn't for me, but at least we've been transparent and straightforward with people, and they can kind of keep opting in. And then the last piece I'll say before handing over to someone else is skills assessment tasks. So valuable, so predictive in how somebody will perform in the role. And we do that before any role-based interviews, because it gives such a good sense of how somebody will perform. And we also do that anonymously. So the people marking it don't know who has submitted it. It really just is how good are they displaying the skills that they need for the role.
And you do, sorry to follow, and you do that through effectively, rather than them presenting something back to you, they send something in effectively, so it's able to be anonymous. And obviously then I guess you're not discriminating against people who maybe can't present as easily, which might actually be necessary in their role, right?
Right. So I think accessibility of the interview process is a whole other avenue, which is so fascinating. We sort of at each stage try to give a few options, but the skills assessment task, yeah, correct. There's no face-to-face at that point. If somebody is neurodiverse or has specific needs that mean that they would prefer to do a face-to-face interview in written form, we also try to accommodate that. So yeah, short answer, skills assessment task, yeah, always anonymous, always on paper, tied to the role that they'd be doing. And normally it'll be me, a member of the people team, doing the admin for that. So accepting the skills assessment tasks and then passing it on in a process that we've designed internally so that people don't see who is submitting.
I suppose with that as well, that's obviously within the recruitment process. I suppose when we're looking at whittling down numbers of adverts, there's got to be a level of getting the right people to apply, I suppose, to start with, hasn't there? In terms of, you can't hit, I suppose, diversity and inclusion if we're not even getting them in the first place, i.e. through adverts or however the attraction process is. So I want to put that to the panel as well, in terms of how can we go about that with adverts, or the way we obviously hold ourselves as companies. How can we get that aspect before we even get into the recruitment process? Or could it be like language within I suppose adverts, or is it sort of just, as Fiona pointed out, via like visibility on teams? How do we go about championing that and making sure that's, I suppose, out there?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we do. I mean, you've just touched on one of them, Sam, which is debiasing the language that we use in our job ads. So obviously there's like the male, stereotypically male and female language, but then there's also things that we found may sort of put off like either neurodivergent people from applying to certain roles, or people with other types of disabilities, using language like what's the phrase, where it's sort of jargon or things like is a go-getter and things like that, as opposed to actual specific desired skills. So that's touching on how we would adjust some of our language. But then we also work with quite a few recruitment partners across diversity. So I mean, I think there's about 8 that we've partnered with at the moment, and they push our job adverts out to their talent pool and also help us to adjust it. However, the problem that we face, and I was going to pose this question as well, as we're a media company, for the majority of our roles, tech is probably the only exception, but we typically hire within sector, so we don't get as high a volume of applicants as we'd like coming through the diversity partners, because they're obviously a lot broader. I'm guessing that with your companies it's probably slightly different, but yeah, we've not had as much traction as we'd like through our partners, which has been a bit frustrating, but it's mainly because we're looking for people in sector.
We don't specifically look for people who are in sector, but we tend to find that those people will have an existing cultural fit, which is why we've taken the word culture out of hiring, and we tend to talk about values through hiring instead of culture, because culturally we're all people who are from go-getter startups, and quite a lot of the people who we've already got here like words and like vegetable puns. We're a bit of a fan of vegetable puns, and really conversational language, which isn't always neuro-inclusive. So we've tried to take the word culture out of hiring and talk about our values. So instead of talking about, is somebody a cultural fit, do they align with our values? And that's very different things for different teams. And our tech team potentially have a different version of how those values fit for their team than in other teams. And it tends to be quite fact-based language. So obviously, while trying to avoid the male-coded words, the analytical and data and stakeholders and all of those words that we know are traditionally male-coded, it's trying to be quite direct with our engineering candidates and tell them exactly what they should be able to expect without losing that viewpoint that we want them to be a part of the company. We do want them to enjoy working somewhere where vegetables are a pun and, you know, on every wall. So it's quite a fine balance to kind of get to make sure that our language can be direct without losing the spirit of why we enjoy working here.
Yeah, I think we're fairly similar to that. And I think, again, we certain things we benefit from, I guess, who we're trying to attract, and we're trying to attract at a consumer level women. So a lot of the language that we are used internally, we're big pun people as well. So you'll see kind of a lot of puns and lot of, it is probably female centric, the language we use because of our business. But I think again, similar to Fiona, we are in the process of, so it's not done yet, but kind of obviously we have our mission, our brand values, and I think we're then breaking those down as a team internally and actually getting the wider team to start, what are the values you want us to live by as a business? And then again, each team will then go beyond that and kind of decipher those a little bit to their specific teams, because I do think there are slight nuances between how each team can kind of interpret those values. But yeah, getting I think, well, we hope we can let you know how we get on, but we hope by letting the team kind of brainstorm and come to that kind of decision on what our values can be, that will actually have a bigger impact in the recruitment pipeline as well.
Something that Mary Williams, who is the current CTO of Pleo, says is culture add versus culture fit. And that's something that I have strongly stolen and adopted, that I think is really important for everybody doing interviews to integrate into the practice. So it's not only, are we finding somebody who has the same skills or background or experience as the current team, but do they have anything better? Because we always want to hire people who are better than we are. So what we've done in our job descriptions as well is like, this is what you'll be doing. This is your day-to-day. These are the activities, and this is what we're looking for. And if we know that we have a lot of climate experience and we don't have as much data governance and experience on our team, then we'll explicitly say that we're looking for that. And I find that that's actually really helpful in helping branch out and look for the kind of people that we want. And sometimes it means that we don't have as many applicants because it's so specific, but that can be a good and bad thing because you end up with a really strong pool of people.
Do any of you use blind CVs or where, I mean, we use an ATS where it's an option actually to make each profile blind effectively, so you actually don't know the gender or anything. Does anybody use that? Have interest?
Yes.
And how do you find it?
I honestly don't see any downsides. I think the one hiccup that we encounter is when people do specific formatting on their CV and it can't be anonymized. So you have to click to say, I'd like to see it. So actually there's a weird movement backwards to say, there's so much AI in hiring now that please don't format it in a fun way because it won't be able to read it. But just being able to see somebody's role, where somebody worked, and to get a sense of the progression without seeing any of the details about the actual person is really, really impactful. And I think something that we add to it that I think goes nicely with it is that instead of a cover letter, which is very GPT centric these days is to ask for a written answer, which obviously can be done on GPT as well. But if you're getting 500 applications, you can pick up on the patterns and see where it's been used. But you get a sense of who the person is in relation to the role in that way. So you kind of take a step back from who they are as a person maybe and just focus on what they bring to the role in the first instance. And then later on, you can get to know them as a person.
We've tested blind applications and found that the recruitment team could always not profile those people subconsciously without having that data, and different writing patterns between different educational backgrounds, different ethnicity backgrounds, different genders, different neurodivergences. An experienced team are seeing those things, and we found it actually had a negative impact on diversity because people were assuming that the bias was being countered by not being able to see that information, and actually they were still going for the 100% fit rather than giving somebody the benefit of the doubt on kind of a 75% fit for the looking at that diversity. And we found it actually had a negative impact in our trials. So I've tried it here and at a previous company as well that was much higher volume, and it didn't actually come out with the results that we were looking for. We've trialed ways of putting in testing that is a test before you see anything that person has written, and we haven't found the right test for that yet. But I'm all for the idea of a skills-based assessment that isn't based around the written word, that is kind of right or wrong answers rather than a tone of voice. But a tone of voice is quite easily attributed to skill sets, to kind of personality attributes with a fair level of consistency. So it didn't work for us.
We also tried a platform. This was a couple of years back. I wasn't as involved in it because it was more for our generalist space. So it was our client service roles, designers, things like that. But weirdly, the applicants had to apply on LinkedIn and or our direct ATS and fill in their answer. So it was a written based answering system. So first of all, we found a drop off of applicants because no one could be bothered to put in all of that information manually themselves. I think that it was okay, the applicants that did come through, but I think it would be a lot more difficult to translate that into tech because as we've said, it was very sort of wordy and lot more sort of softer skills that we were looking for in that.
Yes, I think as we've sort of highlighted there are certainly things that are both, well, negatives and positives to both sides of it, isn't there? Especially when we're looking at everything on diversity and inclusion. Going back to the more, I suppose, skills-based assessments we can be doing, anonymizing those so it's coming like not a face-to-face is something, Lauren, you mentioned. Is there anything else we can implement from a tech perspective within the tech teams? I mean by that, from a skills that we can look at inclusion and include that? Is it sort of using more or varying interview practices, or is there anything different we can include to address these issues as well?
So I mentioned this before, something that we add to our application profile at the end, the typical questions that you get at the end is around neurodiversity and accessibility. So somebody at that point can say, I have these needs for the hiring process. So from the beginning, if they make it to the next round of the CV screening, we have a sense that they have hearing loss or they might need to use a specific interpreter, and we can integrate that into the process from the beginning. And I think just from feedback that we've gotten, even the fact that we ask it looks so good to people. And it's even the small things like going back to job descriptions and job adverts. If you say you've got gender neutral bathrooms, or if you have a little note about saying, hey, typically women will apply to fewer jobs because they're, if they don't meet every single skill, don't do that. If you meet most of them, talk to us. And those tiny little details are so small, so easy to implement, and they give the right signals to say we really want to accommodate, we want the best people, and we want to accommodate you as best we can to get you through the door.
And
I like that.
Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say I like that note at the end where you say about encouraging people to apply even if they don't tick every single box and having that visually on the ad. I think that's really clever.
There was one thing that was brought up in a topic that we did early today, actually, with Sean, was that like interviewing panels. So rather than just, there's a lot of obviously face-to-face interviews within tech hiring. We all know that, but sort of one-to-one or one-to-two, as in sort of interviewer to interviewee ratios. And someone sort of highlighted utilizing sort of the rule of four, so having four people and maybe one non-technical. Within that to add to, I believe someone said not culture fit, but culture add. Is that something that anyone's ever implemented or looked at, and how they can maybe sort of diversifying the panel of interviewers rather than just sort of focusing on one or two members of the team?
We do it over multiple stages. It's very difficult to get four stakeholders available all at the same time. Our processes would slow down significantly if we did, but we tend to ensure that we have two stages of interviews that have a range of interviewees, including a non-technical audience, making sure that someone in that room is not an engineer and can still build a collaboration with those engineers.
And have you seen a positive effect from that, or what sort of effects have you driven from that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's given the people coming in that expectation that we would want to collaborate with them. We don't just want to kind of have things pushed from the business to engineering. It's a collaboration, and that person is valued for their ability to communicate as well as their ability to write code. We don't need our coders just kind of sat in a darkened room coding on their own, which isn't attractive for all engineers.
Something we do in our first round of interviews, which is the kind of culture and minimum requirements round, is to include other members of the team. And, you know, they really do represent all the teams of the company. So we train them to carry out the specific kind of interview so that they know what to expect, but also what we're trying to get at. Because, you know, there's so much information up here for us as a people team, and we want to be able to share it. And you do need to train people in it. It's a skill definitely that needs to be practiced. But once they get that training and they are involved in the process, right now we have a partnerships role being hired for, and we have members of the product team doing interviews, for example. It's a really nice way to give people a stake in the hiring process. So to say, you know, this is my company, this is the company I work for, I want to protect the culture, I want to protect what we have, and I play an active role in welcoming new people into the team. I think that internally it's really great. And then also we try to leave time for questions at the end. So it means that they're not just talking to me who, you know, works on the practices and principles and policies of our day-to-day. They can actually say, you know, hey, you're a member of the team. What do you think of this? What's your favorite part? Without me going, well, you know, it's the people and it's just the trust and the autonomy. And they're like, well, you know, is that true? So I think that's a really nice way to do it as well.
You mentioned training then. How does that, I suppose, integrate across is it across the whole team, across all levels, or how does training sort of play a part in the interview process for obviously diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think we have the benefit of still being a small team. We have 5 people who do the interviews with us as a people team. So it's just a matter of sitting down and running through the theory behind interviewing, what good looks like, what to avoid. That is so easy to do. Pairing up with people from the beginning. So us pairing with them as members of the people team. I'm 1.5 member people team, so it's mostly me. And then also having them pair up together. So you don't just feel like you're being launched into this unknown universe of hiring where, you know, this isn't my role and I don't know what to do. It's really like, we're going to train you. We're going to support you to do it when you feel ready. We'll get you out there. And then we're constantly calibrating to make sure that we're testing for the same things across interviews, because obviously that is one drawback of having multiple people doing different ones.
We rolled out a company-wide system as well. So everyone does a conscious inclusion session. It's a workshop. It's not a training session, that piece, but it's a workshop, and asking lots of questions about inclusion and who you could be unknowingly exclude. But added on to that, we added on an interview skills training process that is training all of our managers, and everyone who interviews here is kind of asked to attend that session, and we make sure everyone has that, making sure they know the basics, things like making sure your interview packs are standardized across a role. It's something that so many experienced interviewers just forget. They kind of get into an interview and go, well, I've done this so many times before. They go in having read the CV and without any actual prep on the questions. I'm like, I'd rather you didn't read the CV. I'd rather you ignore the CV and know exactly what you're going to ask, and standardize those questions and make sure it's repeatable and it's scoreable, and you can treat everyone fairly in the moment. That's far more important than what somebody's CV says. And it's absolutely more important than what somebody's cover letter says. We've still got a lot of bias towards cover letters. It's something that, it was just what we were told when we were younger. We were told that if you want a job, you have to tell that company how much you want that job, and you need to center that company in your experience, which isn't true. Somebody can be a really great hire with the barest knowledge of who we are and what we do, but we've just got this so ingrained from our younger adulthood that that's what good looks like, that you need to keep reminding those people. It's not just kind of a drop the training once and leave it be. You've got to keep having those conversations and confronting those biases.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head with that. And I think I don't know if I definitely see a generational change, right? Even the kind of younger generation coming through now are very different to how we were, and that's great, by the way, and I think that should only be kind of praised and encouraged. I think I or we can often fall into the trap of that's how it was when we were there, or when we started our careers. That's how it was. Well, that was a different time. It's a different generation, effectively, and the world, thankfully, has come on a lot from those days. Without giving my age away too much. But yeah, I think things are changing, and it is an education piece as well, isn't it? With our own hiring managers, of why these practices have changed, why it's maybe different from when they first went for a job, that it's not £12,000 a year anymore, and why there's a whole education piece that I think we try and kind of do fairly regularly in an informal kind of way. But this is what is good now. It's a different practice of good, I think.
No, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's always, I suppose, leading from the front, especially as people teams, it's often seen that that's where diversity and inclusion stems from, but in reality, it probably needs to be throughout the whole business, and sort of led from the front from every leader within the company. So as you mentioned, constant training. Sort of how often would you think is most effective to, I suppose, implement this sort of things into tech teams and actually sort of really ingrain the training? Sort of how often do we do it, or how often should we do it, I suppose, if we don't do it often enough?
Well, we have quite an extensive training program, but I guess that's partly down to the fact that our business is so large. It's something that we've only just rolled out this year formally, I would say. So we do, and I'd be keen to get some feedback from others as to how this might seem. But so we do in the standard hiring manager interview training, which is similar to the one that Fiona just mentioned. We then do, as from courtesy of our partners, a diversity and inclusion training for every underrepresented group. So we have one for gender inclusion, neurodiversity, and they're more like workshops as well. But what I was worried about is this sort of saturation and overload of information, where there might be a point where people start to just disengage and the numbers start to drop in terms of who actually turns up for the training. So I think it would probably have been better if we did sort of one overall inclusivity training as opposed to breaking it down. But there is a lot of information to cover, and there's things that people wouldn't have thought of when looking at hiring from a specific diverse group. So yeah, hopefully it still keeps people interested, but It's our trial year, so we're seeing how we're getting on.
We've got so many things. Oh, God, sorry, Lauren, you go.
No, keep going.
So we've got so many things on our list, our to-do list, that we want to do, and I think you're right that the book it often falls with the people team, and I think that's slightly. I'm all for the people, like, you know, it's our job, I think, to start facilitating the conversation. For me, it can only be effective when everybody else is empowered to be a part of it, and I think that can be so many different things. You know, nowadays we see from when we try and sell to corporates that employee resource groups are kind of on the up. So, you know, a women at committee, a LGBTQ plus committee, whatever that may be, of just employees who are acting as I guess as a bit of a more of a passion project alongside their full-time role. They also want to represent the company at this level and that level, and I think they then can have initiatives. Sometimes they then have budget and they can really go about it. Other things that, I mean, we don't do but we want to is, you know, you have your hiring managers, your senior leadership, middle leadership, but also then creating a platform for future leaders. And so then you're actually kind of educating them even earlier, really, than maybe they're not a manager yet, but of what and why and how, when they are at those leadership positions, they can really play an even bigger part. And I guess empowering is the right word from our side. It's how do we empower people to do it, rather than this being a people team down, because then I think it often gets lost, doesn't it?
What's worked well for us is also having it be opt-in. There are just people who aren't going to want to do it, and there's no reason that everybody has to. So in training for hiring specifically, I think it's really nice to understand why people volunteer for it, and then you can integrate that into it. But also just selling people on the impact of hiring. It's something that's sort of just assumed to be everyday work for people teams, for TA teams, that sort of thing. But the impact on the team, you know, if I'm an interviewer from the product team, how will this impact me down the line? I'm spending so much time on this now. And for us to say, you know, we're saving so much time, so much money, we're increasing our innovation. There's so many benefits to getting the right people into the role from the beginning. You are part of this. And these are the standards that we're setting. This is what you should look out for. So connecting it to the purpose and the outcomes of hiring has also been really valuable in being able to kind of have people step up in a really important way into the process.
I really agree, Lauren. That's so powerful.
Fantastic. And so I suppose then we've identified some ways that we can make structural changes within companies, or to drive from a people function. From a people function, is there anything we can do to, I suppose, encourage these effects as well? So whether that be changing benefits or changing interview processes, or what's been the most effective ways that we've, I suppose, any success stories of implementing changes yourselves?
I think a first small one is if there's no salary on there, like I'm not looking. You need to have salary on there for equity reasons. You need to be able to back up the salary that you've got on there. So first step, get the salary onto a job advert.
Yeah, I could not. It still baffles me how many, if you look on LinkedIn, and it's in the minority still, and I cannot get my head around how and why. What are the drawbacks of putting salaries on there? I don't understand it.
So from our perspective, because we have we have a group of competitors, so the other media agencies, we have to be quite sort of closed when it comes to sharing our pay brackets. Also, well, not just against our competitors, but also our existing team members, just to keep like politics regulated in terms of, you know, we're still sort of reassessing, constantly reassessing salary benchmarking and things like that. Because we're so large, it simply wouldn't work to share salary bandings, unfortunately. But in an ideal world, we would, because the amount of times that people apply and they're just sort of way above what we have on offer, it does end up wasting a lot of time on both parties. So it would be really amazing if we could, but I don't know, as an organization of our size, how we would ever be able to do that.
I suppose
at our size, we still have some work to do there for full transparency. There is still some work to do. and we're working very hard on that, and working on making it a priority that bandings will be published very, very soon. But we're not quite there not quite there yet.
I was just going to say, I suppose within tech as well, with the ever-changing landscape that everyone's seen over the last year of salaries both going up and obviously coming down more recently, is there something that can be done maybe within the interview process then to assess that, rather than it for larger organisations? Is there anything that, I suppose, the people team, yourself, Lauren, is there anything that is done internally at that point rather than obviously at the face value of application?
Do you mean once somebody has applied? Or
Yeah.
So in terms of, do you mean screening out people that are in?
Well, a bit of both, sort of be having being able to include more people, and I suppose have that. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I'm not sure what the answer is actually. I think that there is a function on LinkedIn where you can put it, so without publishing it on the ad, we can have it as that next stage. So if somebody applies, they can see, we could do like a manual question where it says, are you happy with the salary at this range? And obviously we screen it out when we speak to them, or send them a quick email beforehand. But yeah, I'm not sure what else we could think about in terms of having it actually on the application, which I guess isn't very inclusive of us.
No, I mean, sort of obviously when you're speaking to people as well, that's a big thing about including people, and obviously making sure that's I suppose only just one thing that we talked about from a I suppose a wider benefits package. Has there been anything else where you've been able to implement and see sort of an increase in success in diversity inclusion within, I suppose, a benefits package for people?
Is that directed to me? Sorry.
Everyone. Sorry.
Oh, everyone.
Sorry, not just you, everyone in general.
I guess we kind of operate in that space, right? So I guess we maybe have some slightly kind of I don't want to say know-how, but I think there's a few things, but policies are great, and I think, but they're not quite enough either. So saying, we have a maternity, we have this policy, that policy, the world again is moving on. Thankfully, there are now things like menstruation policies, menopause policies that are becoming more and more prevalent, which is fantastic. But I think a lot of companies still have them in their filing cabinet, and it's not something you really look at, right, until someone needs it. But I think being really transparent with what you do have, it's all for me anyway. My opinion is about it's facilitating conversations, and as much as we might think. Well, actually, I don't think at all, but I think the old workplace, work and family life or personal life were two parallel lines that never, ever crossed. And we all know that isn't true. There is so much overlap, and I really do, I'm quite passionate about that you're going to get a more engaged employee experience when you recognize that they do overlap. And as an employer and a responsible employer, you have a responsibility with that overlap, right? You can play your part as well as an employer. I mean, I probably shouldn't have said it, but I got the job at the end of the day, so I could. But I when I was interviewing at Hertility, was very upfront with the founders that my wife was pregnant. Now, it's maybe slightly different because I'm a male, so it would maybe carry different connotations. But I kind of stepped back and thought, well, should I have said that? Because that's just not something you typically say to your boss. But then I thought, well, if there's ever a business to be able to do it at, it's probably Hertility. But I think even having those sorts of conversations about family life, and if you're asked a question by your boss one day, what's your plan in 1, 3, 5 years, you still would never dream of saying, well, I'd like to start a family. Well, why not? Why can't we say that? And what's our employer's position on that, and how can they help support that? And I think obviously that's a bit what Hertility is here for, but I think it goes beyond that as well, right?
It's still so daunting to say it. It took a lot of kind of soul searching, because I did the same at my interview. I walked in and said, I'm a mum of 2. One of my kids has got a hearing loss. He needs to go to the doctors more often. I have a disability. I'm neurodivergent. Life is messy, and my hard work probably doesn't look like the same as the teams you've got that have been here through the pandemic that were able to do 10-hour days. I flex, and it's really, really difficult saying it for the first time. And then once you've got that in the people team, being able to mirror that out to everyone you speak to is really empowering. Being able to say to people, yeah, absolutely, we are here to listen to what's going on with you. You can talk about your kids, you can talk about your disability, you can talk about how your neurodivergence affects you and how that's going to affect what you need from work. We're here, we're reasonable. Let's have the conversation. Please don't try and hide these things, because it's just going to make you unwell and less productive.
Yeah, by the way, I hope I wasn't. I didn't want to think it was an easy conversation to have. That wasn't my kind of narrative. I actually think as I said, for me in that situation as a male, it probably is a slightly easier conversation to have for sure. But I guess, yeah, it goes back, I think, as well to education and how we start educating from within, that these are not just conversations that we want to have, that they're necessary for productivity reasons, for a happy workforce is an engaged workforce, and that's going to have good connotations for the business as well. It all does go full circle, right?
Yeah, and people shouldn't feel afraid to have those conversations.
Absolutely.
Realistically, they still are. So the more you can open things up to people, the easier it is for those to have them to have those conversations, and the more likely that somebody diverse will want to join your workforce.
Yeah, we spoke to a potential client last week, and they were looking at menopause in the workplace, and one of the things they decided to do was just have a room in the office that was kind of, you could go to if you're having a hot flush, and you could just go there and it was cooler and all these things. And they said, at the start, it was kind of like, well, no one wanted to go in because would they be judged from walking in there? But then all of a sudden someone does it, or a couple of people do it, and actually it doesn't really matter what people think. If it's helping you and it's there for people like you, then I guess it's doing its job. And it's a little tiny thing maybe for the business, but means a heck of a lot more for the people that need it.
I think that those are, it's really good points. And I think that something that Fiona touched on was sort of flexibility and open communication around people being able to take the time that they need, and that being encouraged sort of across the business. So having leaders and the people team promote sort of a culture of, we can facilitate flexibility, and having senior leaders that show that they've also encountered things in their lives that means that they've needed to take that flexibility, and it's okay. So our chief technology officer, Sean Betts, he's a real advocate for mental health and also neurodiversity. So he's always talking about how the business has helped him get through difficult times and facilitated the environment for him to thrive. And I think that from the top down is where we start to sort of push it through to all levels across the business, so that people feel that they can join if they need that sort of flexibility.
Yeah, the onus is on the business to make it clear to people that they should, this is the environment. And I think it starts with the job adverts, and then it obviously must continue in the experience. So something that we do that I think is relatively unique, which it shouldn't be, is explaining why we have the benefits that we have. So it's not only, we have 4 months maternity and paternity leave, or there's no birthing and non-birthing parent. We have unlimited holiday. It's for this reason. It's because it's a flexible policy. It doesn't mean you can take 250 days off. It means that you can take 1 day off in 2 days, or you can take 2 weeks off in a few months. It means you can have a Netflix day, or you can go on holiday with your family, and understanding that we have this in place so that you know yourself best, when you need a break. We trust you to do that, and this is the policy. And we do that with each of our benefits. And I think that from the get-go, if somebody understands why we have something and the culture that we're building around that, it's not just, a random benefit or perk. It's for employees, it's for the business, then that makes it even more of a tangible, accessible benefit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm conscious of time, so I don't want us to, obviously we can always go on for hours and days and however long in different rabbit holes with this. It is such an important topic, but it sounds very much from, I suppose, collaborating what I've heard today. It's very much about sort of understanding, sort of educating and implementing that within I suppose, the whole company, and then that will then trickle down into tech from that side of things. If it's at the forefront of the business, it's going to be at the forefront of our tech hiring. So I suppose before we close off, is there any final comments about sort of things that could be done going forwards to continue to implement this, I suppose, in our industry that we're all working?
I think things like this are really helpful. A, personally, but B, just for businesses as well, because I think you can, we can all go to the drawing board with our own business about how we think and what we want to do. But actually then when you speak to other people we've all got this challenge. This isn't unique to one of our businesses, and different things that work in different organizations. We might sit here and think, oh, I don't think that'll work in my organization. But actually, until we understand, as Lauren until we understand why we offer these things, and there's tangible reasons as to why, I think the more you kind of share across different industries, across different businesses, the better in a way. And I know that's a really kind of idealistic way of looking at it, because we don't have time to do this all the time, but we should make time for it, because I think it's really useful.
Definitely.
Well, I've really enjoyed having you all on, and I'm sure, well, I hope you've all taken something from each other in terms of points that we can all implement or change. And I know I certainly have, from looking at obviously things that we can do on adverts and things like that. And I'm sure many people that will tune in after obviously this goes live, will take a lot of learnings from. So I really appreciate your time, everyone. It's been great obviously having you all, and hopefully we can do something similar again very soon. But been brilliant having you all.
Thanks so much, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, everyone.
There we
Lovely
go.
to meet you all.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.